Chapter 1045. Hugh. Lying on Jiang Hai's chest, Qi was constantly gasping for breath. At the same time, she slowly moved her legs. The battle just now made her legs tired. Jiang Hai moved the hair on her face because of sweat to the side. Looking at her beautiful face, Jiang Hai gently kissed her forehead, and Qi also smiled sweetly. "Hugh, you didn't do that just now?" Looking up at Jiang Hai, Qi asked in a low voice. "Oh, I already did that, this is the second time." Although Qi's words were not very clear, Jiang Hai understood what she was talking about. He chuckled and said to her. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi also nodded. "That's good. Mom has been urging us to have a child. You have to plant your seed in the right place." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi said with a smile. At the same time, she gently moved and felt something still in her body. She couldn't help but pinched Jiang Hai's waist and then glanced at him. "Go find those little girls. Remember to come back in the morning. Also, don't be found by Mom and Xiao Yi." Looking at Jiang Hai, Qi whispered in Jiang Hai's ear. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, then he shook his head. "I still have a lot of opportunities with them, but I don't have much time with you. Let's sleep like this." Hugging Qi, Jiang Hai said slowly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi was touched. After lightly hitting Jiang Hai, she didn't say anything. She just lay there and her breathing gradually stabilized. "What do you think will happen to third uncle's family in the future?" Hearing Jiang Hai's powerful heartbeat, Qi suddenly asked him. "What else can we do?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai knew that she was being sentimental again. He couldn't help but pat her to stop her from thinking about this matter. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, she also smiled and closed her mouth. Since the incident that day, Qi Yuanlong's family was completely finished. Zhang Yu was dead, and Qi Zhengtao was arrested and sent to prison. According to Jiang Hai's request, he was tortured to death. This time, Qi Zhengtao would probably not be able to get out of prison for 8 to 10 years. Moreover, even if he stayed there for 10 or 8 years, he might not be able to come out. Don't forget that Zhao Chen had also gone in. Would he let Qi Zhengtao, this fellow who had harmed him, off so easily? You don't have to think with your toes to know that it's impossible. After knowing this, Qi still felt a little emotional. After all, they were real relatives. That was her father's younger brother. Although he did it himself, she still couldn't bear to see him in such a miserable state. Okay. After a while, you can take 3/1000 of the shares and give them to your third uncle. You can give him dividends for his retirement, but you have no right to control them." Looking at Qi's appearance, Jiang Hai sighed. Women really can't harden their hearts. Really? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi's eyes widened and she said with a smile. "Well, okay, don't think about it now. Tomorrow, Fu Yuan said that he would have a barbecue at his house. Have you thought about what to bring?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also changed the topic. "Now is not the time to think about those things. Beef, I marinated it with little ya in the afternoon." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi also said with a smile. "Only beef? Isn't it a little too little?" Looking at Qi, Jiang Hai asked with some concern. "What else do you want to bring? You have to sell those things for money." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi couldn't help but pout. Okay, you have the final say." Shrugging, Qi is here, so let her have the final say. Women are really stingy. Early the next morning, Jiang Hai and Qi drove away under the envious eyes of Qi Jia and Qi Ya. This was the 6th day since Jiang Hai returned to Bing City. The first 3 days were used to deal with things, and the second 3 days were used to take care of his mother-in-law. Originally, Jiang Hai thought that his mother-in-law would have to have an operation this time, but unexpectedly, it was useless. Perhaps it was because she still had the foundation of eating beef and seafood in the past. After taking out some of the frozen beef and seafood that Jingxua Yi had not thrown away in time to cook, the old lady's heart gradually returned to the right track. As long as it can be temporarily pulled back, Jiang Hai's aura will be able to cure the old lady's illness. The old lady's illness gradually improved, and Jiang Hai breathed a sigh of relief. Chia had been teaching Jingxua how to cook these days and how to take care of the old lady. Qi Jia was a doctor, so naturally, she had to stay at home. Azalina, Wallace Shelley, and Du Ning had nothing to do, so they all lived in Jiang Hai's villa. Jiang Hai and Qili were relatively free. According to the old lady's original plan, Jiang Hai and Qili should go back. However, Jiang Hai didn't dare to wait for Qi Jia and the others, so he could only wait here. As for Qili, since Jiang Hai was in China, she was not in a hurry to go back. At present, the Qi group was slowly on the right track. She controlled the Qi group from afar, so there would be no problems. Recently, she had been training people to take over the Qi group. It might not be very convincing if she said it out loud. The person she was most optimistic about was LVC. However, after this incident, it was estimated that even if LVC didn't hold a grudge against her, Qili would no longer believe her. Therefore, they had to look for new talents and nurture them anew. This was not an easy task. If she wanted to train people, she was destined to be separated from Jiang Hai for a short time. In this case, how could she not seize the opportunity to stay by Jiang Hai's side, even if it was only for a minute? Therefore, she was very close to Jiang Hai these days. Except for the time when Jiang Hai went to the bathroom, she even followed him to take a bath. She was not shy. It was precisely because he knew her inner thoughts that Jiang Hai didn't leave last night. Today's party was booked when Jiang Hai and Fu Yuan went to take a bath that day. Jiang Hai's friends must have a gathering when he came back. Fu Yuan bought a house 2 years ago. It was a ready-made house, but he didn't live in it. Because the community hadn't been repaired yet, the supporting materials hadn't been completed, and the place was quite remote. Of course, it was only 2 years later. The place was still remote, and the things hadn't been completed yet. However, Fu Yuan wasn't in a hurry. After all, he still didn't have a girlfriend that he was going to get married to. But in the past few years, whether he was pretending or not, the renovation of his house had also been completed. Since Jiang Hai had come back and everyone was present, he decided to go to his house and have a look. It could be considered as a celebration. For a new house like this, people would come over to check it out. The main reason was to add some liveliness to the house and ask the guests who originally lived in the house to leave. Of course, this was also the old man's way of saying. However, there seemed to be some reason behind this statement. Look at those places where people come and go all year round. For example, hospitals. You know that many people have died here, but when you go there during normal times, very few people will feel that the hospital is lifeless. Of course, there is an exception at night. As for schools, when children go to school, no one will feel that it is a little eerie. But when the children were out of school, the whole school was similar to a ghost house. This was also relatively typical. Although Fu Yuan didn't have such an idea, his parents believed in these things. So, he specially invited Jiang Hai and his friends to go over to increase the popularity. Jiang Hai and the others naturally wouldn't not come. They came over to play. Of course, they had to come. Driving the BMW, Jiang Hai and Qili brought 10 pounds of beef to Fu Yuan's new house. To be honest, the place of his new house was indeed very remote. The community was in the north, south, east, and west. There were only things in the east and south. In the east, there was a community that was being built. There was also a ski resort inside. It was the kind that was indoor and very high-end. The south was the road. His community was at the head of this area. There was also a new community opposite. In the north and west, there was a large wilderness. There weren't even trees. It was all grass that was half a person's height. It wasn't the first time Jiang Hai came. The last time he came, he said that if Fu Yuan and his wife were tired of playing at home in the future, they could go there to play. Along the way, there were a lot of people. Basically, they were all renovated. There were also a lot of cars. Some were private, and some were for transporting goods. But in this neighborhood, the supporting facilities obviously hadn't been built yet. Along the way, there were a lot of cars that sold steel pipes, sanitary ware, and paint. But there were very few restaurants and small supermarkets. There were only a few snack shops and the like. Fortunately, Jiang Hai and the others were already prepared, so after the car arrived and parked, Jiang Hai and Qili went directly to Fu Yuan's house. After pressing the doorbell and taking the elevator in, Jiang Hai found that some people had already arrived. Because of the need for popularity, there were really a lot of people who came. In addition to Jiang Hai and Qili, there were Su Wei, Xiang Hua's family of 3, Wang Yunfei and his wife, Wang Yong and his wife, Wu Ming and his wife with their 2 children. There was also a cousin of Fu Yuan. Jiang Hai had seen him before, and a classmate of his. There were 14 people including the children. When they walked in, it was quite lively. Several children, big or small, were running around the room in the nursery. The women all went to the kitchen to help. Wang Yong, Wu Ming, Huang Yunfei, and Su Wei were playing mahjong. Fu Yuan, his cousin, and his classmate were playing Fight the Landlord. It was quite lively. When they saw Jiang Hai and Qili coming, everyone looked over. Here is the beef. Cut it and marinate it. We will eat it later. Seeing Fu Yuan coming over, Jiang Hai handed the beef to him first. More than a dozen people naturally couldn't eat enough beef, but today, they were not here to eat beef. Your beef, TSK, I have to leave some. Recently, I have taken a fancy to a girl. Whether I can get her or not depends on your beef. Taking the beef in Jiang Hai's hand, Fu Yuan smacked his lips. He knew that Jiang Hai's thing was really fun. P.S. I recommend a buddy's new book, My Portable World of Mixed Farmers. It is a very good farming book. Friends who are out of books can go and read it. The author is Dong DePeo, who is known as the Yuan self-driving cannon. He is a super experienced driver, the racing god of Mount Akina. He can recite all kinds of vegetables, fruit seeds, and army numbers. If you need, you can go and see if he has a book group. Chapter 1046. Tell me if you want to eat. I will definitely support your marriage. Do it today. Drive to my place to pick it up in a few days. I still have some. Hearing Fu Yuan's words, Jiang Hai also said to him with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai say this, Fu Yuan also gave him a thumbs up and then took it to the kitchen with a smile. Naturally, there would be people working there. Although Fu Yuan didn't have a girlfriend yet, there were a lot of women who came today. It was inevitable